When Judge Douglas Warren summoned Callie Morgan to his courtroom that morning, he believed he had found the perfect prey, a modest literature teacher who had dared to publicly question his decision at a community meeting. Part of him wanted to assert who truly held authority in this town, but a crueler part simply wanted to soothe his bruised ego. And Callie Morgan in his mind would make a perfect example, lose her job, her reputation, and perhaps even the very belief in justice she taught her students every day. But Callie, dressed in a burgundy sweater, clutching a small folder, her eyes calm, was nothing like the woman he'd imagined. In her classroom at Greenbrook High, she had just written symbolism in modern literature across the whiteboard. Her students, some attentive others counting down to lunch, had no idea their teacher was about to step into a battle no curriculum had ever prepared her for. Miss Morgan. A boy raised his hand. Why do we need to analyze symbols? Can't we just enjoy the story? Callie smiled. Because literature is how we understand the world. Metaphors, symbols, they're not just pretty language. They remind us of justice, truth, and courage. She didn't yet know that those very ideals she'd just spoken would soon be put to the test in a place without lesson plans where a teacher would have to become her own defender. As the lunch bell rang, students flooded out of the classroom like water bursting from a dam. Callie gathered her lesson plans, her eyes landing on a forgotten school newspaper left on a desk. The headline jumped out at her: controversial ruling by Judge Douglas Warren affects school funding. She frowned. A month ago, she had spoken at the town hall stating bluntly that diverting educational funds into a private development was legal but morally wrong. She hadn't thought her words would make anyone feel threatened. That afternoon in the faculty lounge, her colleague Sarah leaned in with a hushed warning. Heard you shook up the whole room at that meeting. But Callie, Warren has friends everywhere. Callie just smiled lightly and packed up her things. I'm just a literature teacher sharing an opinion. What's he going to do? Sue me for that? But what most people at Greenbrook High didn't know was that Callie Morgan had graduated top of her class from Vermont State Law School. She'd never practiced after intense internships. She realized the courtroom wasn't where she belonged. Instead, she chose a quieter path, planting seeds of justice through essays and classroom discussion, where she could guide young minds to seek truth, not through verdicts, but through words. And because of that, she had no idea. She had just stepped into a power game where the other player was a judge who wielded the law like a weapon. Callie's old car turned down a narrow road toward her quiet apartment complex. Early autumn leaves fluttered onto her windshield, and a cool breeze slipped through a cracked window. In her mind, her grandfather's voice echoed. The law isn't meant to rule over people. It's meant to protect those who can't protect themselves. Her grandfather, a small-town lawyer with no fancy plaques or big-name cases, but beloved by his community as a pillar of ethics. He was the first to teach Callie the difference between what is legal and what is right. That evening in her modest one-bedroom apartment, Callie kicked off her shoes, brewed a cup of tea, and sat before a worn wooden bookshelf. Her grandfather's old law books, The Constitution, Principles of Fair Trial Legal Ethics, sat quietly dust-coated. She brushed her fingers along their spines like touching a sleeping memory. She had never forgotten who she once trained to become. But she had never regretted choosing to teach instead. In the middle of grading student essays, her answering machine blinked. A steady male voice played Ms. Morgan. This is the clerk from the municipal court. You are being summoned regarding a traffic violation from last month. Judge Warren will be presiding. Please appear this Friday at 9:00 a.m. Callie froze. A traffic violation? She had been ticketed 3 weeks ago for rolling through a stop sign, but had paid the fine online the next day. Her brow furrowed. A cold knot formed in her stomach, and suddenly she remembered Judge Warren's cold stare at the town hall meeting. Strange. Callie muttered, opening her laptop to check her payment receipt. She didn't know that this call was the beginning of a trap already set. Judge Douglas Warren's office exuded authority from every detail, the heavy mahogany shelves weighed down with aged legal volumes, golden-framed awards lining the wall, and a massive desk tilted just enough to make every visitor feel small. That morning, he was reviewing a thin file Callie Morgan printed in neat type at the corner. His fingers tapped rhythmically, then paused. His furrowed brow slowly melted into a calculating smile. "Gerald," he called to his clerk, "bring me everything you've got on this teacher." The young clerk, long familiar with his boss's quiet tempers, entered carrying the slim file. "The traffic summons was sent as you requested, Your Honor." Warren gave a small nod, hands steepled before him like in prayer, though nothing in his eyes spoke of divinity. "She thinks she can stand before a community and question my judgment. I've sentenced hardened criminals who showed more respect, but—" "It was just a town meeting," Gerald offered cautiously, freedom of speech and all. "It wasn't what she said, Gerald. It was how she said it. Her arguments were sharp, her references precise, her tone calm yet cutting. She had made him look incompetent before the town council." Warren slammed the file shut. "Modify the summons, change it from a paid traffic violation to failure to appear, and add contempt of court." Gerald went pale. "Sir." "That would be falsifying." Warren didn't blink. "Judges have discretion for a reason. Consider it a lesson in respect." That evening, Judge Douglas Warren sat at a lavish dinner table among community leaders. Between the clink of crystal glasses and candlelight, he swirled his red wine and spoke with casual menace. "I'm concerned about the growing trend of rebellious thinking in schools, particularly from teachers who see themselves as moral crusaders." His eyes landed on the director of education. The older man caught the signal instantly and nodded uneasily. "I'll look into it right away." The trap was now complete. The next morning at Greenbrook High, after a faculty meeting ended, Principal Paul Mathers asked Callie to stay behind. Gone was his usual warmth. He removed his glasses, massaging the bridge of his nose. "Callie, I got a call from the department yesterday. Apparently you're involved in some kind of legal trouble." Callie blinked. "You mean the traffic ticket I paid that? Early last month." Paul slid a paper across the desk. "Not exactly. There's information suggesting you were summoned and failed to appear. And now you're facing contempt of court." Callie gripped her folder slightly. "This is about the town hall meeting, isn't it?" Paul didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than words. That afternoon, Callie opened her apartment mailbox. Inside was an official court notice, not the automated kind, but a formal document: failure to appear, contempt of court, mandatory hearing in 3 days. Her hands trembled not from fear but realization. This was no administrative mistake. This was a deliberate attack. The next morning, Callie's home phone rang sharply. It was Sarah from the English department. "Callie, something weird is going on at school. The principal asked if you've been discussing politics in class." Callie stiffened. "Politics. We're teaching To Kill a Mockingbird. The curriculum literally requires us to talk about justice and prejudice." "Yeah, I know, but I don't think this is about the book." Sarah hesitated. "I think they're watching you." That afternoon, Callie stood at the front of her class. The air felt unusually still. In the back row, Principal Paul Mathers sat silently, notepad in hand, never taking his eyes off her. She read the line aloud from the novel, "Real courage is when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and see it through no matter what." And in that moment, Callie felt the weight of every word she uttered measured, monitored, recorded. After class, Paul approached her desk. "Just reviewing the teaching." "You know how many eyes are out there. Best to be careful." That night, Callie sat alone in the corner of her living room. Traffic ticket summonses, lesson plans piled messily around her. No one called her outstanding educator anymore. Now she was simply a person of interest. She glanced up at the bookshelf where a photo of her grandfather still stood, gentle-eyed and steady. Callie picked up his old leather journal worn with years of courtroom notes. A yellowed newspaper clipping fell out her grandfather standing with townspeople after helping them win a corruption case. Beneath it, faded words read, "You don't fight power with power. The wise use preparation and truth." Callie took a deep breath. The trembling in her eyes was gone. Now, only clarity remained cold sharp, and awakened. Night fell quietly over the town of Greenbrook. The only light came from the window of a third-floor apartment, casting a soft glow onto the empty street. Inside, Callie sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of law books, printed court documents, and scribbled notes from her grandfather's old journal. The teapot beside her had gone cold, but within her a fire had been rekindled, not a fire of rage, but the glow of strategy. The phone on the table buzzed. Callie had made 3 calls that night. The first to an old friend, now a lawyer with the Vermont Bar Association. "I don't need representation. I just need to know the rules for filing a motion to recuse a judge, and how to defend myself against false contempt charges." The second to Noah Chen, a former student who used to love journalism, now an investigative reporter at a local paper. "Noah, can you help me dig up Judge Warren's rulings over the past 5 years, focus on contempt charges and any repeating patterns?" The third, a voicemail to the court clerk's office. "This is Callie Morgan. I'll be representing myself at the upcoming hearing." The next morning, Callie entered her classroom like any other day. But this time, as she lectured on To Kill a Mockingbird, her voice was steadier, her gaze more composed. Principal Mathers sat in the back again, quietly taking notes. He listened as Callie said, "Sometimes standing for what's right doesn't mean winning. It just means having the courage to stand, even when you know there will be consequences." After class, Callie quietly tucked a pocket recorder into her purse. She double-checked her evidence folder, organized copies of receipts, procedures, and legal printouts like a soldier preparing for battle. Beneath 2 binders, she placed a sealed envelope, something she hoped she'd never have to use. But if cornered, it would be the kill shot, Grandpa always said. The strongest one in the courtroom isn't the loudest. It's the one who prepares more than anyone else thinks necessary, she whispered to herself. The city courthouse was unusually crowded that Friday morning. Lawyers rushed between rooms. Clerks called out names, and weary defendants waited to learn their fate. Callie Morgan sat silently in the back row. In her hands, her grandfather's old leather briefcase, inside every piece of evidence arranged like a tactical symphony. She observed. Judge Warren sat on the bench, cold, proud, swift. He ran through previous cases like a conveyor belt, interrupting defendants mid-sentence, rarely citing law. Everything operated by one pattern: absolute power, unquestioned authority. Docket 47B, Morgan Callie. Failure to appear and contempt of court, the clerk called. Callie stood and approached the defendant's table. All eyes turned to her, a blonde woman in a burgundy sweater, calm to the point of unsettling. Judge Warren glanced briefly at her file, not even lifting his head. "Miss Morgan, you are charged with failing to appear for your October 15th summons and with contempt of court." "How do you plead not guilty, Your Honor?" Callie answered, voice steady and clear. "I believe there has been a mistake, and I request the chance to clarify." Warren raised an eyebrow, unused to confidence from unrepresented defendants. "The matter is clear. You received the summons, failed to appear, and were penalized accordingly. With all due respect, Your Honor," Callie said, holding up a printout. "I received a citation on October 1st and paid it online by October 3rd. Here's the receipt. No court summons was included." The clerk brought the document to Warren, who glanced at it and dismissed it. "Payment doesn't negate the requirement to appear. All citations require a court date." Callie produced the original ticket. "Respectfully, there is no such requirement on this notice, and the online system confirmed my case was resolved." A flicker of discomfort crossed Warren's face. Lawyers in the back began to pay attention. The air shifted from routine to alert. Callie looked him in the eye. "I request that the court provide proof that I received the October 15th summons." Warren motioned to the clerk. Minutes later, a piece of paper was produced, no sender's signature, no postmark, no delivery confirmation. Just a generic notice with a pre-printed date. Callie gently turned the paper. No delivery confirmation. No recipient signature. Under Section 7.3 of the City Court Procedures, this does not qualify as valid notice for contempt charges. A hush fell across the room. Warren gripped the arm of his chair. "Ms. Morgan, you're playing with legal fire." "No, sir." Callie responded, calm but unmoved. "I'm reminding this court of its own procedures." The balance in the room tilted. The hunter had sensed resistance. But this prey wasn't running. She came with claws sharpened. Judge Warren leaned forward, his gaze narrowing. "What exactly is your objective here, Ms. Morgan?" Callie didn't flinch. "To clear my name and to ensure that power is never used to silence criticism in this courtroom or outside of it." The room was tense. A few local reporters had slipped in during the exchange, drawn by the subtle shift in energy. One of them, Noah Chen, scribbled notes furiously. Callie placed another document on the table. "This is a log of Judge Warren's contempt charges over the past 18 months, showing a pattern of issuing contempt orders against individuals who publicly disagreed with his rulings, even in non-legal settings." Warren's face darkened. "Are you implying misconduct? I'm requesting the recusal of Your Honor from presiding over my case due to demonstrated bias pursuant to Judicial Code 2111. The courtroom was no longer just watching, it was holding its breath. A murmur rippled across the benches. "Ms. Morgan, this is not how things work," Warren snapped. "With all due respect," Sir Callie replied softly. "That's exactly the problem." For a moment, Warren sat still. Then, in a move that surprised even the bailiff, he abruptly adjourned the hearing. "No ruling today. The motion for recusal will be reviewed." Court dismissed. The gavel struck, but it sounded less like authority and more like retreat. Callie quietly gathered her papers and stepped outside the crisp air of autumn, washing over her like a quiet victory. The next morning, the town's local paper ran the headline, "Teacher Challenges, Judge a Case of Contempt or Control." Within hours, the school board received calls from parents, some worried, some inspired. "Why is our teacher being punished for speaking out at a town meeting? Is this how the legal system works around here?" Principal Mathers called her in. "Callie, this is getting bigger than just your case." "I didn't make it bigger, Paul," she replied. "The system did." She was no longer the subject of whispers in the hallways, she was the headline. Even staff who once kept their distance now offered quiet nods or slipped her a supportive note in the lounge. Callie returned to her classroom, chalk in hand. On the board, she wrote, "Lesson when silence becomes complicity." Her students looked at her differently now, not just as a teacher, but as someone who lived what she taught. Weeks later, the Vermont Judicial Review Board quietly launched an inquiry into Judge Warren's recent conduct. Rumors began to surface. One city council member told the press there were complaints, but no one ever had the guts or the evidence to challenge him until now. Warren's courtroom became a quieter place. Fewer contempt charges, shorter hearings. The once untouchable judge was now under a microscope. At Greenbrook High, Callie received a letter from the superintendent. It read, "We commend your courage in standing for procedural fairness and civic responsibility. You remain a valued member of this district." Sarah hugged her in the break room. "You didn't just survive it, Cal. You shifted the air." And as for Noah Chen, his article got picked up by a regional paper. The title, "The English Teacher Who Reminded a Court What Justice Looks Like." One rainy afternoon, Callie visited her grandfather's grave, a modest headstone under a chestnut tree. She knelt beside it, fingers tracing the carved name voice barely above a whisper. "You were right, Grandpa. Law isn't for dominating. It's for protecting." She placed a folded article beside the stone, the newspaper clipping with her photo under the headline. Then she smiled. Back at school, her students were presenting essays on justice. One boy read aloud, "True courage isn't loud. It's not about arguing to win. It's about showing up when no one expects you to and telling the truth, even when it costs something." Callie stood in the back of the room, quietly listening. She didn't need a courtroom to teach justice. She had her chalkboard and the next generation, and that was more powerful than any gavel could ever be.